Hello everyone, this is Abhijit Dasgupta from 366 SkyTech and welcome to another session of FLO Blockchain App Development by SkyPiCast. We will be having these live online sessions till 15th of September 2018 every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturdays at 9 p.m. IST. So don't forget to tune into all of those to continue in this journey of apps development on FLO Blockchain with us. We would like to thank Rachi Mall for their continued support in our blockchain journey. We would also like to thank the entire FLO community and its dev team for all the support. In this session, we will be starting on building a web application on C#.NET for creating a FLO blockchain-based business cards application. Using this application, people would be able to create business cards by entering their details, and the data will then be stored in the FLO blockchain. We will be doing this entire application development in the span of 3 sessions starting from today. Just to have a recap of our previous session, in our previous session, we completed the REST API using the C# SDK for all the FLO JSON RPCs. So if you remember, we completed the APIs and we added some endpoints which we are certainly going to be using in this particular application that we are going to be building next, the FLO business card application. We will be leveraging those APIs that we created in our previous session and using those in this application of ours to create this application. So for today's session, as I mentioned, this application development would be spanned in 3 sessions, and today will be the first of those 3 sessions. We will be creating this business card application, and we have decided to actually split this activity into 3 sessions so that we can keep each session very concise and targeted and don't stretch the sessions too long. In this particular session of today, we are going to be setting up the project in Visual Studio, and we are going to be creating the data entry screen or the UI using the Bootstrap framework. Bootstrap is a very awesome framework of very awesome GUI framework. In fact, it's based on HTML5, CSS and JavaScript, and lately it has been using SASS and jQuery's latest versions, and the latest version is, I guess, Bootstrap 4. It really helps you to create awesome looking HTML UI very easily. So we are going to be leveraging that particular framework, Bootstrap framework, for our designing, so that we can create decent looking application UI very easily and very quickly. So let's just go ahead and see what approach we will be following in creating this particular application. In this particular application that we are going to be creating, the basic approach would be that the user will come to the website. They will be presented with a screen with some user entry user detail entry form. The details that we are going to be capturing from the user would be very basic details which generally appear on a business card, like your name, your organization that you're working for, what is your designation over there, what is your email ID, what is your phone number, and also as part of this application we are going to be using the image of you, whichever image you want to add to this business card. For this particular iteration of the app that we are going to be showing in these sessions, what we will be doing is we will be asking the user to enter the URL of their image that is already available somewhere on the web. Like for example, you can have your Facebook profile pic or your Twitter profile pic, or best if you have your LinkedIn profile, you can just use your LinkedIn profile pic. So the LinkedIn profile pic URL could be something that is available over the web, and we are going to be since if you remember in FLO blockchain, the flow data that we have, it is about 1040 bytes of data that it can store. So obviously we cannot store an entire image file in the FLO blockchain, but we can certainly store the URL that is currently available. So our image file will actually reside anywhere on any server, on any application that is available on the web, and we are just going to keep a reference of that particular image URL on our FLO data application as part of this app data. Once the user enters all these details, what we are going to be creating in the backend part of our code is we are going to be creating a text which will be stored in the flow data. We will be defining a set, a protocol or a fixed format which will be used to bifurcate and store our data in that particular format. So let's say we keep as identifier as 3665 P card app or something like that, like we did it for the donation app. Then we can keep some separators like hash, pipe, or any special symbol or any character that you want to use in between your data fields to just to segregate those based on those particular separator characters. So we will have the entire data that we collect from the user back to the flow data in the blockchain. And then once that data has been created, we will perform a transaction and push that data to the blockchain. So if you remember, whenever we have to store any data into the flow blockchain as part of flow data, we need to perform a transaction, which is the send to address transaction. In that send to address, you need to specify which address you are going to send the flow to. You need to specify what will be the amount, some configurational parameters are there, and then you specify the actual flow data or the message that needs to be stored in that particular transaction. So we create the transaction message over in the second part, and the approach that we are going to be using for this application is we are not going to send the flow to some other wallet or some other people. We are going to be using a address which is already available in our own wallet only, which our API is accessing for communication with blockchain. So what will happen is we will be sending a certain number of flow, for example, 0.1 flow or 0.001 flow, and we will be making that transaction and we will be sending that exact amount back to our own wallet only. So at the back end, what will happen is we will be only expending only the transaction fee. And even if we are sending 100 flow, we are actually not sending 100 flow. We are not spending 100 flow actually. We are just spending the transaction fee. So this will be a cost-effective way wherein we will not be spending a lot of flow to store our data. We will just be paying the transaction fee, but in effect, we are actually storing the data also just by paying the transaction fee. So the source and destination address both will be our own, so that the data that the flow that goes out from our wallet comes back to our wallet, but only the transaction fee gets deducted by. So once the third step would be that we will be performing the transaction and pushing the data to the blockchain. Then the next step that will happen is once the transaction has been successfully done, we will get a transaction ID from the blockchain. So we need to capture that particular transaction ID. Why do we need this transaction ID? Because this transaction ID will actually help us to get the data whenever it is required from the blockchain. We can then use our own API endpoints that we created in our previous session, like the get transaction or get raw transaction, and pass this particular transaction ID and get details of that transaction, including the flow data. Once we have that, we will be using that flow data that is retrieved from the blockchain, and we will use the format that we created in the second step, and we will follow that particular format and split the data based on the separators that we have and get the data back from blockchain. Each and every field values like the name, the designation, the organization, telephone number, mobile number, and the image URL, and then just place them in a placeholder of the flow card or the B card application that we create. So this will be a completely dynamic application wherein the entire data will not be stored anywhere on a local server or any databases. The entire data will be stored directly on the blockchain, and the data will be retrieved from blockchain also. So this is something that we intend to do. And once you get this particular transaction ID, what we also plan to do is we will create a QR code for this particular transaction. So whenever the user has that QR code, he can just save it anywhere, or he can share this to anyone, and anyone with that particular QR code can just scan it and see your business card directly from the blockchain represent into our application. So let's just go ahead and start with this application development. So just to remind again, we are going to be setting up the Visual Studio project for the application in this session, and then we are going to be setting up the UI for getting the details from the users. And for the UI part, we are going to be leveraging the Bootstrap framework for the UI design. So please give me a moment to stop this slideshow and go to Visual Studio. So if you see in our screen, we have the Visual Studio opened on our computer, and this is a pretty much default screen of Visual Studio whenever you actually open up Visual Studio for the first time, or you just start the Visual Studio IDE. In this particular project, what we are going to be creating is we are going to create a web application, and that web application would be a web form application that we are going to be creating, just because it's easier to create and it takes a lot less time. And for that particular purpose, what we are going to do is we are going to click on this file menu. Under that, we are going to go new and click on project. Once the project template window opens, we are going to be selecting Visual C# as our language. Click on the web category, and under that we are going to be selecting ASP.NET Web Application.NET Framework. Again, do remember that we can use .NET Framework 4.6.1. Actually, for this particular application, we do not have to use 4.6.1 because we are not directly using the SDK. If you remember, I told you that whenever we are going to be referencing the SDK library into an application, we need this particular framework because the SDK is built on this. But for this particular application, it is not entirely necessary. Because this time we are not going to be referencing the library into this application. We are actually going to be using the API that we already built using that SDK. So this can be done on any framework, but just to keep the project on the updated scale of frameworks, we are going to be using this 4.6.1 only. So let's just do one thing and give this application a name. So let's just say this application as FLO Business Card. So we can use any name if you want. And we are just going to name this FLO Business Card. So this particular project will be created in the Visual Studio's project directory, and it will just ask you which template you want. We are just going to be using a empty template, so that no predefined pages are created. So once we click on the OK button, it will just start creating the project, and we should see all the resources for that project, default resources over here. And once we have that, we just need to start building our application. So let's just wait for this particular project to get created, and we'll continue. So while this project is getting created, let me just again tell you what we will be going to do for this particular application. We will be creating one web form. Basically, it will be a page wherein the user will come and they will see a particular screen or a UI or a enter form wherein they need to enter the details for the business card. And once they fill up the data, they'll just click on the submit button. And once they click on the submit button, the backend code will actually perform all the tasks like creating the data for FLO data, actually performing the transaction, sending it to the API, getting the transaction ID back, and then showing that transaction, then using that transaction ID to call the API again to get the transaction detail back from blockchain. And once the data comes from blockchain, then using that particular data to actually populate the business card template that we create, the blank template, it will populate it with the data from blockchain, and also create possibly a QR code for that particular URL, which will be used to access the application and get the particular business card anytime, anywhere you want. So let's just start with this. And the first thing that we are going to be creating here is the form that we will be using to that the users will be using to get the application data in place. So for this particular application, we are going to be using web forms, which is a type of web component that Visual Studio or .NET Framework has, wherein you have a UI side or the design side, and you have a code side. So the application or the page is divided into two parts. One is the design and one is the actual coding part. So those two are segregated, and you can just perform the designing part separately and then work on the coding part. So if you go to the add link and click on new item, once we have this, we are greeted with this add a new item window. Herein we click on the web part, and under this web part we have this web form. So let's just give this particular web form a name. Let's just say flow card form, and it will be having an extension of .aspx. So that is something that Visual Studio will automatically add. So we'll just click on add, and you should see a page getting created here with the name flowcardform.aspx. So if you just look at it closely, it's a basic HTML page that we have for any web page, but it just has a little bit of detail at the top of the page or the first line, wherein it has some details like the page language being used is C#, auto event, var up, code behind, and all these things. These are some of the data that Visual Studio uses for all the web forms. So if you see the flowcard form.aspx or any ASPX form for that matter has a ASPX page, which is actually the HTML part of it. And if you go to the bottom of this, you have two different components to this. One is the page name.aspx.cs, and this is actually the C# code part wherein you handle all the events, create all the methods for handling data and doing all the backend task for this particular page. And you also have a designer.cs, which is generally not edited or used by a developer like me, because whatever you design on your ASPX page, this particular designer automatically creates those controls or .NET controls automatically over here. So whichever control or the .NET controls which are available in this left hand side toolbox, once you drag and drop these, it will automatically reflect in this designer page. So this designer page, what it does is, whichever control you add to the ASPX page's HTML part, it actually binds that to the backend code. So it is something of a bridge wherein any control that gets created in the ASPX or the HTML part is accessible to the ASPX.cs or the actual code behind. So for that to happen, this designer page becomes important. So we will go to that once we are into the code part of it. For this particular session, the only setup that we needed to do is this. Now we are going to be starting with the designing of the form. So just to give you a quick rundown of what we are expecting our form to have is, we are going to create a decent looking website, a very simplistic web form, wherein we will have a user enter their details like the name, their company name or organization name, their designation that they hold, the phone number, email ID, and the URL of their image that is available on the web publicly. So these are some of the details that we are going to be accepting from the user. Apart from this, we are going to have a submit button, which will be used to actually submit the data and create the business card actually. So let's just start with this. Visual Studio, whenever you create a flow ASPX page, it creates some sort of a template HTML. So we can have this available, and we can just add into this as our requirements go. So if you remember, for this particular designing, what I said is I'm going to be using a design framework called Bootstrap. And Bootstrap was created by Twitter for their design purposes, and later on they made it open source. And this particular framework is very popular among web developers for creating the applications, because it gives you a grid view sort of a system for managing your design and layouts and everything, and it has a huge number of controls and CSS classes, including with some JavaScript effects and everything available. A lot of Bootstrap based themes are available free and paid as well. You can very well use any available theme that has been created to create this design. Just for the simplicity and keeping these sessions simple, we are going to be using the basic Bootstrap theme, and we are going to be using some of the basic components of this. In integrating the Bootstrap framework into any HTML page for that matter is very easy. What you need to do is you just need to have the Bootstrap CSS available in your page into the head section under the link tag. If you have worked on any type of HTML or web designing, you know that if you are integrating any type of CSS files which is available, you can do that either by downloading the CSS file, keeping that into your project directory, and referencing that into your application using the link tag. Or what you can also do is you can refer those CSS or files or JavaScript files from CDNs. CDNs are content delivery networks wherein these resources are available and they provide high availability of these particular resources. So for this particular application also, what we are going to be doing here is we are going to be using the CDN approach of integrating the Bootstrap and jQuery, which is required for implementing the Bootstrap framework into any web application. For that, I have just kept those CDN URLs available in a notepad with me, and I'm just going to be copy pasting those links. We will be also be using these CDN links in the adding these CDN links into the description of this video on YouTube. So you will have those there also. So what we are going to do here is we are going to go to the head tag of the HTML page and add these three tags. The first one, if you see, is the link tag, which is saying that the type of this particular link is the style sheet, or a CSS file is called a cascading style sheet, or it provides gives your page some styling elements, and the entire sheet wherein you define those design elements are called style sheets. So the bootstrap.min.css, this is the file that I'm accessing from the bootstrapcdn.com, and the version that I'm using is 3.3.7. So the current version that is available on the Bootstrap website is the 4, but I'm using a previous version of this just because the current Bootstrap version has gone through a lot of changes. Those need to be integrated into the development practices that we do. So just to keep this simple, we are going to be using the Bootstrap 3.3.7 version, and we are going to be accessing this from the CDN. Another thing that is required is for this Bootstrap is the Bootstrap CSS file, which contains all the designing elements, and the bootstrap.js file or the JavaScript file. This JavaScript file of Bootstrap will actually give you all those effects like fading effects, all those animation sort of things which are available in Bootstrap. But for this particular Bootstrap to work, Bootstrap.js to work, we also need to actually import the jQuery JS file. jQuery is the JavaScript framework that is substantially used in today's day and age in web application development and designing and all those things. jQuery is a de facto standard when it comes to client-side coding using JavaScript. So the bootstrap.js file is also built using the jQuery. So that is why you need to implement or import the jQuery. Always remember, when you are using bootstrap.js file, you need to import the jQuery file before Bootstrap, because whenever you are using JavaScript or CSS file, they actually use the concept of inheritance. So if you have jQuery.min.js after bootstrap.min.js, a lot of the functionalities of bootstrap.min.js will not work because they are dependent on jQuery's functionalities. And when this particular page is getting loaded into the client's browser, it is actually interpreted. What it means is the browser actually reads the page line by line and then executes them. So if the jQuery reference is after Bootstrap, so when the bootstrap.js page is being loaded, all those references of jQuery won't be available by the browser, and the browser won't be able to find those functionalities anywhere. So it won't know how to find those particular functionalities, and it will just show errors and your application won't work. So once jQuery has been loaded, only after that the Bootstrap JS will be loaded, which is dependent on the jQuery. So this is something that is applicable across web development when you are using these type of JavaScripts and CSS files which are dependent on each other. So always use the JavaScript or the CSS file which is the base CSS or the base JS first, and the different JS classes which actually are using that particular base JS after that. So that is the practice that we generally use in JavaScript and CSS implementations. So once we have this, we pretty much have our page bootstrapped. So the next thing that we are going to do here is we are going to be creating, I'm just going to delete this particular piece of code from the body. So our entire design will happen in the body tag. So if you are a web developer, you know that any type of data that comes into a web page, it comes from the body tag. So we are going to be designing our entire web page into this body tag. So the if you go to bootstrap.com or W3 Schools and search for Bootstrap, you will have a lot of references into how to design a page using Bootstrap. So let's just go ahead and start with this. The first thing that we are going to be creating here is a div. A div is basically a container or a tag or a placeholder wherein we can use it for many purposes. It actually is a placeholder which can work as which can be used to contain data. It can be used to make have your page some sort of a layout and everything. So what Bootstrap has done is they have added lot of classes for these divs and everything, so that you can use those to have some sort of layouting and different type of effects and design elements available. So the first thing that generally is used in a Bootstrap page is a class with a div class with class name as container. So this particular div which we are creating with class container will actually act as the container which will contain all the other elements that we create after this. So this will contain all the elements. So once we have that, under this container we will create a form tag which will be holding all our form elements like the text boxes and the buttons and everything. So in HTML, when you are creating any form elements or UI elements which are accepting data from user, they are generally encapsulated under a form tag. So in this for particular Visual Studio web form, we are just going to give this particular form a name. I'm just going to give it a name FRM, and also I need to give it a ID which is required by web forms. So ID is also I'm giving same name as the ID, and one extra attribute that is only applicable for Visual Studio ASPX pages is run at, and I'll add run at equal to server. In a web form or ASPX page in Visual Studio, a run at server means that this particular control will be available to the backend code of C# that is created. So if you are creating controls and you add this attribute run at server, they can be directly accessible from the code behind or the C# code that you have. If you are not using run at equal to server, you won't be able to access these controls directly, and you have to go through the JavaScript way or some other way to access those, which is actually an indirect way. But if you're using web form, run at equal to server attribute makes it very easy to access these controls and manipulate them from the code behind. So once this is created, what we are going to be adding here is we are going to just create a small heading for the user to know what this app is all about. So we are just going to use a h2 tag, which is a heading level 2, which is the second largest heading type that is defined in HTML. So we're just going to be calling this heading as FLO Blockchain Visiting Card or something, or business card. FLO Blockchain Business Card. So this is something which will just give you an idea as to what this app is. Obviously, when you create this application for yourself, you can do any sort of styling, any type of feature. We're just going to be showing a very basic version or a basic premise of this particular application, just to give you an idea of to how this application can be created, and you could just do anything from. So once we have this particular H2 available or the heading available, we are going to, if you just take a step back and see how Bootstrap is used to design elements, we actually create rows of data or rows under the container. So for that particular row to be created, what we do is we create a div with a class called. So under that row, you can actually split your data or arrange your data into multiple. Bootstrap allows you to arrange your data under a row into a grid system which is divided into 12 parts. So those columns can have 12 equal sized sizes actually. So we can use either a single column with entire 12 size, which will take up the entire space of your web page, or you can just, if you want to have half of your page with that particular column, you can just use 6 as the value, and so that is somehow we can do that. For any references to that, you can just go over to bootstrap.com or go to W3 Schools and the Bootstrap section of it to get to know more details about this particular Bootstrap designing. So what we are going to be creating here is we are going to create a div with a class called row, and this will just create default row for us, and under that row we are going to be creating a column, a div with class column. The class column is called call, and because Bootstrap is also a responsive designing framework, it means if you are opening it in a browser in your computer, it will take the size of your browser screen and show you the entire page according to that screen size. But if you're opening this particular page, exact page in a mobile device, it will automatically change or adapt according to the size of the mobile device. So you don't need to create multiple website versions for mobile tabs and desktops as a whole. It automatically adjusts its size as per the device from where it is being accessed. So in this, there are attributes like call LG, which is for large. There is also called call MD, which is for medium devices, and call SM for small devices. But you could just use any one. And if you want to, say for example, if you want to use a entire page width for your browser or computers, so it will have call LG12, the entire size. But if you want your mobile devices not to have the entire size but to just have a quarter of the page size, so if you can use call SM3. So you can have multiple classes attached to this, and they will behave as per the devices that they get access from. So for the simplicity of this particular design, we are just going to be using the LG part of it, and we are going to be giving it a size of 6. That means we are going to be using half of our web page width, and this particular column is created. Inside that, what we are going to be creating here is, we are going to be creating a panel. A panel is basically a sort of a container which can have 3 separate parts. One is the header, one is the body, and one is the footer. So it is entirely up to you to which parts of that particular panel you are using. Generally, we tend to use the header and the body, and if we require, we can also use the footer if you want. So for creating a panel, it is very easy. You just create a div with a class called panel, and under that panel, you also need to add another class which will actually design this particular panel. So the first class that we are adding, the panel, it will just tell your browser that this particular div is a panel and render it as a panel of Bootstrap. Then we do here is we just style this particular panel, and we tell what type of panel design it is. So there are a lot of panel designs that you have. You have panel danger, panel default, you have panel info, panel primary. You can get the references of these because what you are doing here, once we add panel primary, it will create a panel with the heading in blue and the body in gray or white. So different, if you use panel info, the headings color will change. So these color schemes are actually managed by these panel types. So we are going to be using a panel primary, which will actually make our heading part of the panel in blue, and the bottom part or the body part will be in white. So that is something we require. If you can change it to anything of your choice. Once we have that, we need to create 2 div classes actually. One will be for the panel heading. We say that panel hyphen heading. So one will be panel heading, and we just create a div for this, and we'll just put something over here. Let's just create another div with class equal to panel body, and this will contain the entire form into this particular body. So let's just go ahead and add some heading into this panel heading part, and let's just say enter details here or anything like that. You can just add any message you want to put in your panel heading. So we are pretty much done with the panel heading. Let's just go ahead and see how this page actually looks right now, and then do other or add different styling elements later. So for that, you just need to click on this start button, wherein you will this particular application will be compiled, and you will see a browser window come up with this particular browser, whichever you have selected as your default. Mine is Google Chrome. So a Google Chrome page should come up, and you should see a design of this particular page, whatever we have created till now. So once you have that and you see that you are in pretty much line with whatever you want, you can pretty much make adjustments as per your requirements to the code and just refresh the page to see whether they got reflected or not. So this is the browser page that is currently opening up with the output. So let's just wait for a few seconds for that particular output to come. So the first time building this application and running this application might take some time, just because it does all the background stuff in behind when you're doing it. And also, if you see, this particular browser is actually actually debugging the Visual Studio JavaScript code. So this particular application is being called. So I'll just copy the URL over here and I'll just directly run it, and let's see what comes up, because the debugger is taking a lot of time to start. Okay, so as you see, this is the code that we created, and this is the output till now what we have done. So if you see, this particular design has been created based on the Bootstrap standards. So if you have a look at here, we created an H2 which got translated to this particular heading that we are seeing over here. This blue box that you are seeing, the blue border box, this is actually the panel that we are talking about. So this particular panel has been created, and if you just expand your screen as per your page size, what you are going to see here is it is actually creating a size of panel as per the screen size. So when you create your application and add the call once you resize your browser, it will automatically, if you see, this particular panel is get, so as per the width of the application based on the size that you mentioned, this particular panel is getting resized. So what we have done here is we have created a panel heading. The panel heading has enter details here which we created over here, and the panel body is currently empty because we haven't added anything. The next thing that I'll just show you for a quick second is if you just change this primary to something, say info, and just refresh this page, it will just change the design of this particular. So this is a info panel that we have. Let's just change it to another called danger. So this is another panel type, so the color and the design will change. So it will just lead to some reddish sort of a tint. So whichever you want you can use. I'll just use the primary one just because it looks a little as per our requirements. So I'll just create this, and we have the panel actually created. Now let's just move ahead and create the application or the controls for this particular application. So the first thing that we are going to be creating here is we are going to be creating the control tags for the name or the organization name and everything. For that, actually Bootstrap gives you a class called form group. So every form element that we create, we will have a label and a input control like a text box. So the label and the input control will together form a form group, and they will be treated as one group of controls by Bootstrap, and they will be rendered as per that particular logic. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create a div class called form group. So this is a form group, and under this form group, firstly we are going to be creating a tag called label. We are going to be calling this table with a for attribute, and we are going to be adding the control name for which this label is going to be used for. So let's just say that name is text name, which we will just define after this, and we'll just close the tag and say name. So just below this, we are going to be under this form group only, we are going to be creating a input tag called input with type equal to text. So in HTML, input element is actually something which creates input controls. And type equal to text means it will create a text box or a single line text box which will accept single line of text. So after this, we are just going to be adding a class called form control, which will just make this particular text box a little prettier actually. So after that, for our web form accessibility, we are going to be adding the name txt name, which is the one we are using over here also for our label attachment. And after that, as I said you earlier, for accessing any control from backend code, we use this run at equal to server. So this is pretty much done. We have this, and let's just run this application and see what got created so that we can just continue with the rest of the inputs that need to be created. So if you see, this is the panel that we created earlier, and this was a blank space. So now we created a label called name, and just below that, by default, Bootstrap, what it does is it creates the label, and below it, it uses the control based on the size that you have used. If you want this label and text box to appear alongside, what you need to do is you need to add class into the form tag, and that class would be form hyphen inline. But as in my experience, I've seen that this particular layout looks much prettier than the inline layout. So what we are going to do is we are just going to be creating the other tags, that other controls that we require. So we'll just copy this particular group and just paste this as many times as we want, and make the adjustments as per the controls that is needed. So the second one that we will be creating is for the designation. We just paste it. We just change the ID for the control to say txt desig, and we change the text label for also to reflect this particular control, and in the label we say designation, and after that let's again copy this organization, one for phone and one for the image URL. So let's just modify these as per our requirements. So let's just say this is a text org for the text organization. Copy this into the label and say here as the organization. And then the next one would be txt. We have name, designation, organization. Let's tell this as email. So let's say the control name as txt email. Attach that to our label and say here as email. The second last one we are going to be using to accept mobile numbers or phone numbers. So let's just say txt phone and use this in the label, and over here we say phone number. The last one that we are going to be here is the txt URL. So this will be the text box wherein the user will enter the entire URL for the image that they have available in any sort of social platform and anywhere available in the web, which can be publicly accessible. So let's just say that the user needs to enter the photo URL. So let's just say photo URL. So that's pretty much done. So let's just stop this for a moment and add another control, which will be the button or the submit button. So just after this last particular form group or the control, we are going to hit the enter button and create some space for adding a button. If you see here in the left side of the screen, this is the toolbox wherein you can just drag drop controls to it, and you can just drag a button control, and this button control gets created. I'm just going to rename the controllers to as per my requirements. I'm just going to say this as button submit or btn submit. If you see, this particular button is already run at server because it's a .NET control and we dragged and dropped it. The text that is required will be the text that will be shown on the button. So we are going to be saying this as a submit, and just because this won't look pretty without any CSS, let's just see how it looks, because we haven't added any classes to this particular button. so it won't look very pretty when we run this without the CSS. Let's just see how it looks, and we will add some CSS to make that look a little better. So if you see over here, we have created our form for data entry, and that is by default created by any HTML. So if you see, this is looking, if you want to make it look a bit pretty, we'll just see. Just remember, if you're using like we use for our inputs, these are HTML which we also want to added run at server. But the button that we created is ASP control. Can be seen by this ASP. So this is something which is created by ASP.NET by itself, and it is not a generic HTML control. It will get translated into a generic HTML control on runtime. But for this, in this control, if we want to add some CSS class, as in a HTML tag, we can just use the class to add any CSS class to it. But for a ASP control to have a CSS class, the attribute that uses basically CSS class. And under that, you can just add any class that you want. So for button, for any control to act a button and design it at a button, Bootstrap actually gives you a class which will render this particular control as a button or a Bootstrap button. And after that, for adjusting the colors of it, we have some options like BTN primary, like it will show you a blue color like we had in the panel, or you can have BTN danger, BTN default, BTN but for the sake of uniformity, like we are using panel head is a primary color, we are also going to be using this button in the same color scheme. So I'm just using the CSS class BTN, and I'll just refresh this particular page just to reflect that. So if you see, just by adding that particular class, we just designed our button to a pretty much a much better looking button other than that ugly looking HTML control that we have. So we are pretty much done with the HTML part and the designing part of the UI, and we will be today only as part of this. So this is as our previous session, but we specifically wanted to keep it shorter just because to have these into concise and targeted sessions. So this particular session we use the UI. In the next session, what we are going to be doing here is we are going to be creating the backend code for creating the flow data that is actually entered into the form that we just created. We will be performing the transaction and pushing the transaction to blockchain and capturing the transaction ID back from the blockchain. So that is something that we plan on doing in the next session. For the last session that we do, we will be getting the transaction ID that we get in the next session. We will be using that transaction to fetch the data back from blockchain, create the blockchain data of this particular. That's it for this session, everyone. I hope it is an informative and helpful session for you all. As always, we would be happy to receive any suggestions, feedback, or questions regarding the session and any topics in our email ID, which is mentioned on screen, Abhijit@. We usually try to revert back within a day or two with your answers. We would also request you to like and share and subscribe our YouTube channel already. Please also spread the word about SkyPiCast and its initiative and the sessions so that we future. Thanks and good day and see you next.
All right. Thank you, Abhijit.
Hi, Mitesh.
Yeah, thanks for it was